Tonight, Zelensky says Russia is not taking peace talks seriously. It's after Putin didn't turn up to meetings in Turkey. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio now says he has a low expectation there'll be a breakthrough until the Russian president meets Donald Trump. Also tonight, as Keir Starmer visits Albania, Downing Street signals it's in talks to send failed asylum seekers abroad, but not to Albania. Snub or part of the plan all along? We'll be there live. We've caught up with Rachel Reeves at Rolls-Royce's factory in the Midlands, where she's been insisting the government is making the right choices to grow the economy. Plus, more on the prisons crisis. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner warns changes to recall policy will have consequences which could be deadly. We'll get the details from our correspondent, Molly Malone. And as Sky News launches Ask Us Anything, I'm getting fully behind it myself, providing the political answers tonight. John McDonnell and Ranil Jayawardena, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophie Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, I want to start tonight's programme with Ukraine because Volodymyr Zelensky says the delegation that Russia has sent to peace talks shows they're not serious about agreeing to a ceasefire deal. The meetings taking place in Turkey are set to be the first direct negotiations between the two countries in 3 years. But Vladimir Putin isn't attending, despite the Ukrainian president challenging him to meet face-to-face. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi has this report.
President Zelensky jetted into the Turkish capital Ankara to show the world he was a man prepared to talk peace, if Russia's leader did the same. But as he arrived, it was clear that it would be a no-show from his nemesis.
President Zelensky, Sky News, do you have a message for Vladimir Putin?
I think this is very clear.
A meeting with President Erdogan was a chance to talk next steps and increase the pressure on the Russians.
How are you? Good.
Consideration, too, on how to engage with the low-level delegation the Kremlin had sent to Turkey. By coming to Turkey and effectively daring Vladimir Putin to do the same, President Zelensky is sending a message to the world, and in particular the American administration of Donald Trump, that Ukraine is not the barrier to peace. He's trying to galvanize international opinion around the view that it is Russia that is stalling the peace process. In Istanbul, amidst high security, the press waited for those talks to get underway, with Ukraine accusing Moscow of not being serious, calling the peace talks team theatrical.
I think that the Kremlin leader should show his leadership. If he's ready for negotiations, let's meet. Without any preconditions. Whatever he wants, let's meet. We're in Ankara, in Turkey. We arrived here. Then we're sending our group to Istanbul. He's not here. He's not in Istanbul. We can't really run around the world looking for him. I believe the United States and Turkey are currently feeling disrespected by Russia, in my opinion.
The Americans had hoped for much from these talks, but Trump, on a tour of the Middle East, is playing down the lack of success.
I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
And at the Kremlin, it was clear there was no sign Putin was feeling the need to get on a plane. His negotiating team in Istanbul talking up the process, but his foreign minister launching this attack.
At first, Zelensky was making some statements demanding that Putin come in person. He is a pathetic man. Everybody understands, except perhaps himself and those who control him. Why is a ceasefire needed? To pump Ukraine up so it can prepare to negotiate from a position of strength.
The failure of the first direct talks in 3 years to make much progress means the conflict and the killing in Ukraine continues. This the site of an attack on the city of Sumy. There is still a flicker of hope that the peace process can gain some momentum. But at the moment, the war shows no sign of ending. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Ankara.
Let's talk now to our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, who's in Istanbul for us. Alex just said in his report that there's a flicker of hope. How sort of strong do you think that flicker is?
Not terribly strong, but it is there. I mean, we're in this slightly chaotic world where Volodymyr Zelensky and a pretty high-powered team are up there in Ankara, and he's saying, well, you said to be in Turkey, here I am. Vladimir Putin is nowhere to be seen and has sent a B team here to Istanbul, but that B team have been twiddling their thumbs today and basically saying, well, we're actually prepared to have chats, but we haven't got anyone to talk to. And then the spectre of the Americans hangs over Istanbul. There's talk of Steve Witkoff, this new uber diplomat, one-time golfing buddy of Donald Trump and now the kind of next Henry Kissinger flying in. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is in Turkey, but actually for a NATO meeting. And Rubio has spoken today and said again and again, this will only be resolved when Presidents Trump and Putin sit down face to face. And then on the sidelines, you've also got the European leaders, the coalition of the willing, who have said if there is no progress here, and spoiler alert, there probably won't be, then they are going to impose much stricter sanctions. Now, on the one hand, you could say this is all 4D chess and that Vladimir Putin is playing everyone, that he's insulting the Ukrainians and he's trying to pull the Americans out. If you were more generous, you might say, well, is this the first gentle steps along a path, the end of the beginning, as it were? Is there a chance that tomorrow morning or even late tonight, the two sides, the Ukrainians and Russians, could start informal talks that create a thread that becomes a line towards a ceasefire deal? I think you'd have to be very optimistic to think that anything is going to be signed anytime soon. I think the other side of this is that comment from Donald Trump on his plane, echoed by Rubio, that this only ends with Trump and Putin in a room. And that will, on one hand, make some people think, well, yes, OK, that's the spectre of ceasefire. And then it will worry others. Notably, it will worry Volodymyr Zelensky, who will think, well, hold on, Donald Trump's the president of a country that's thousands of miles away from Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is president of the country that invaded Ukraine. Why are these two people responsible for a deal? European leaders will say, well, we're being frozen out once again on something that is hugely consequential for us. And the pragmatists will say that, when it comes down to it, is probably the way to a ceasefire, because without the buy-in of Putin and Trump and the diplomatic heft that they bring, probably nothing is ever going to happen.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Parsons there giving his analysis on the war in Ukraine. Well, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell and the former Conservative Minister Sir Ranil Jayawardena. Great to have you both with us. Ranil, to you first. It's just so frustrating, I guess. I'm not really sure the words to describe it, but it feels as if we're still as far away almost as ever.
Well, clearly these are really baby steps, aren't they? And I'm not here to defend Vladimir Putin, clearly, but Russia is a country that sees itself as an equal to the United States, so it's probably no surprise to hear what we've just heard there, that he is not going to engage until Donald Trump is engaging with this process. But at least there seems to be a pathway, and that's positive. We've got to take that win, which is there is now hope that we can reach a ceasefire, and that's what we've got to go for.
Even if it's a flicker. John, what's your take on it?
Putin's playing hard to get, isn't he? So he's negotiating, as he always has. He's really a skillful negotiator. And so the next issue will be who goes where. If I was Putin, I'd be angling for an invitation to the White House, because that would be a status invitation. I don't think Trump will fall for that. But the problem is, time and time again, Putin has outwitted Trump in these negotiations. So I just want, if it is about a meeting between them, get on with it as quickly as possible because people are dying out there.
Yes, really great to get your responses. We'll have lots more from both of you throughout the programme as well. And, of course, reaction to those negotiations over Ukraine likely to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor, Rachel Cunliffe. Now, the UK is in talks with other countries about sending failed asylum seekers to overseas returns hubs in a bid to try and tackle illegal migration. Keir Starmer made the announcement on a trip to Albania.
We are in talks with a number of countries about return hubs, and I see them as a really important innovation, and that is consistent with the work that we've done in relation to UK-Albania reduction in numbers.
But this was the response from the Albanian Prime Minister.
We have been asked by several countries if we were open to it, and we said no, because we are loyal to the marriage with Italy, and the rest is just love.
I mean, it's not great optics, is it? I mean, Number 10 are at pains to stress that they knew Albania weren't going to be part of this all along. It's other countries they're talking to about it. But it does illustrate a wider point about all of these migration deals, whether the Conservatives' Rwanda plan or the Number 10 version, which only applies to failed claims. It's not the principle that gets you in the end, it's the practicality. You know, who's going to take them? How much are you going to have to pay for it? What are the legal hurdles? How long is it all going to take? Italy, that we heard the Albanian Prime Minister referencing there, Italy spent 600 million euros on migrant detention centres in Albania, similar to the Starmer plan. And so far, only 40 failed asylum seekers have been sent there. The Conservatives, of course, managed to send a grand total of 0 people to Rwanda. And look, when you consider that 12,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats already this year, well, it puts those numbers in context, doesn't it? And speak now to our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's travelling with the Prime Minister. So Tamara, Number 10 said, look, they knew the Albanians weren't part of this deal, but it looked a bit odd, didn't it, that they were announcing this and then the Albanians say, oh, yeah, we're not interested.
It was a very awkward moment in the press conference, Sophie, earlier today when Tirana was a lot sunnier than it is now, that Keir Starmer, although he wasn't here to talk about that, he was here, first official visit by a British Prime Minister, a big moment over here, to talk about the good work that UK and Albanian officials are doing to crack down on smuggling gangs through intelligence sharing, searching vehicles, cracking down on forged documents. He wanted to make an announcement about return hubs, which the UK government has always toyed with, but today he said it's something we want to do and we are actively exploring it with various countries. He didn't say which countries they were. Immediately came a question from an Albanian journalist to the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, who was just re-elected last week for a 4th term, and he made pretty clear, as you could see there, we're not doing it for the UK. He said we're doing it for Italy, which has 2 return hubs. These are effectively centres to process migrants who have been deemed ineligible to stay in the country. They're empty at the moment. Sky News visited them last year because of legal challenges, but he said Italy is our long-term friend and a geographical partner, and therefore we're only doing it for them as a one-off. Now, Keir Starmer's team say this is not a slap down or an embarrassment, as the Conservatives had called it, because he wasn't here to talk to them about that, and he will be discussing it with various other countries, potentially in this region at the European summit tomorrow. Might be their first opportunity to do so. And there are also big questions about whether return hubs will actually work anyway, but certainly not a great reception for the idea from the Albanian side, who have been angry in the past at the way they've been characterised sometimes by UK ministers. So Starmer will be battling headlines on that tomorrow, I think, and we wait to see whether return hubs will actually become a reality, potentially at a summit in the UK later this year.
Thanks, Tamara. I'm going to leave you to go and grab an umbrella. It looks like you might need it. Although you look remarkably dry, to be honest. I don't know how you managed it. Thanks very much. Right, let's bring in John and Renil again, shall we? John, what's your take on this policy from Keir Starmer?
I don't understand it. If they're failed asylum seekers, they get returned to their country of origin. If they can't go back to their country of origin, well, therefore, they should be accepted as asylum seekers, as refugees. So I don't understand it. So we haven't seen the detail yet.
Isn't it that you can't return people? We don't have returns agreement with that many countries, do we?
No, but in the normal run of things, you would just take them back to their normal country they came from. That's what the bulk of them who've come from war zones and things like that, if it's now safe and peaceful, they then get returned. But if it's not safe and peaceful, well, they're asylum seekers who should be accepted. So I don't understand it. And whoever's doing Labour's public relations, to actually then get the Prime Minister to announce it in a country that we know has refused it, is just extraordinary, really. But one of the things I saw in some of the press coverage, though, there was a rant by one of the Labour spokespeople against asylum seekers, basically, and mechanisms that people use to stay here. And to be honest, I thought it was unacceptable what was being said. And it seems to be part of this strategy. If the way to beat reform is to become reform, that's not going to work, quite honestly.
Are you... there's been a bit of chatter about Morgan McSweeney from some on the left in the party. Is that something that you're picking up?
I think there are issues about the operation that, Morgan McSweeney is the head of that operation. And I think there's some real concerns that actually there needs to be a political grip of this now. Keir needs to get a grip of some of the things that are happening in his name, because like the speech the other day drafted referred to the Enoch Powell statement, whoever thought that was a good idea, it was a huge mistake. And it worries me because it means Keir hasn't got a grip of that and he needs to. And actually, he should have had the political nous to recognise that that was going to be a disaster.
I mean, some, I guess, say Number 10 might say, look, if John McDonnell's against it, then...
No, fair enough. I understand that. So test the water with other people, other members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and also party members and our supporters. And I tell you, on that issue, the anxiety right the way across, left, right and centre was there.
What do you make of all this?
Well, first of all, I just don't buy this line that they always knew Albania wasn't going to take part in this, having... it seems briefed out that they were going to take part in it in advance. So I don't buy that. But beyond that, I think John's right. This is a very muddled, knee-jerk policy from a really panicked Prime Minister. He's seen the rise of reform in his former constituencies, it seems, and decided, I need to do something. But what he's proposing isn't going to work. It's not going to solve the problems. And if he'd actually given... and I would say this, wouldn't I? But if he'd given the Rwanda plan a chance, which he had the chance to do, and even if he thought it wasn't going to work, he should have given it a chance and proven that he was right, then if he'd given it a chance, it would have been the deterrent. This simply says, well, if people are processed here and they're rejected, then we will send them to a return centre. What's to stop them disappearing into the system in the first place?
But the Rwanda plan was sending people out there, not failed...
To be processed.
To be processed.
Exactly.
But it is better, and it is better for everyone concerned to have them processed in this country. Much more efficient. And in addition to that, those people who make in the application have the proper resources and support to do that.
People disappear. This is part of the problem. That's why this plan is flawed from Keir Starmer, because the minute someone is rejected from asylum, they will disappear into the country.
Can I, because you were saying there about Keir Starmer chasing reform. Do you feel that perhaps the Conservatives have almost given the example of what happens if you chase reform? You get obliterated at the election.
Well, we set out a policy before this even happened, before the election happened, the general election happened.
But I guess my point is that something that because the Conservatives were trying to chase those reform voters and go down that line, you basically, it's failed, right? Because you
I certainly agree.
A terrible election result.
I certainly agree. You've got to stand for what you believe in, not try and pretend to be something else. And I thought it was actually quite distasteful, Keir Starmer's response to the leader of Plaid Cymru at Prime Minister's questions, where she challenged him on, does a single policy of his survive a day in Downing Street or something to that effect. And I thought, actually she had a point. She was speaking, I think, for the large majority of Labour MPs. And he slapped her down, and I thought that was unbecoming of the Prime Minister.
On the disappearance point, let me just contradict that, because I deal with these cases virtually every day, and I have 2 detention centres in my constituency. What happens is if someone's overstaying, they go for the normal monthly sign-on, then they get detained, and that's it. And then if they fail, then they're straight out of the country. Simple as that.
So, really? So it's not, you don't think it is a case of people...
No, I don't think it is about that, no. I genuinely think that this is someone around Keir has decided that to compete with Reform, you have to start adopting some of their language and some of their policies, and I think it's a disastrous strategy.
Thanks both very much indeed. Really interesting debate there. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Rachel Reeves says the UK economy is beginning to turn a corner. We'll hear why the Chancellor's upbeat mood might be short-lived.
Show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the Chancellor's been telling our economics and data editor Ed Conway that the economy is beginning to turn a corner after new growth figures beat expectations. Well, the new numbers out earlier showed that GDP rose by 0.7 percentage points in the first quarter of this year. And Rachel Reeves also told Ed it shows the government is making the right choices. Here's his report.
If you're one of those people who thinks we don't make anything in this country anymore, here are two good examples of why you're wrong. This aluminium plant in Shropshire makes advanced alloys that go into batteries and lithography printing presses. A fifth of it shipped straight to America. And here at Rolls-Royce in Derby, they make jet engines that keep the world flying.
Hopefully lots and lots of work for you.
There are good economic news stories all around if you know where to look.
Hello.
And perhaps that's why the Chancellor chose this place to talk about the latest better-than-expected growth figures.
There's clearly economic headwinds and the world is changing. We can see that all around us. But we are a strong economy. I do believe that we can seize the opportunities. The fact that we were the first country to secure a trade agreement with the United States is significant. And these numbers today are very welcome.
OK, so the fact that the Bank of England thinks that it's going back to 0.1% in the coming quarters, do you think that should be ignored, should it?
Look, the numbers today are important. They show an economy that is growing across the board.
You might recall Rolls-Royce was actually name-checked in the Oval Office last week when Donald Trump announced the latest trade agreement with Britain. The problem is, for all the talk, they still don't have anything in writing.
I think it's really encouraging to see that they specifically considered aerospace tariffs, and it was great to see that they'd been specifically thinking about Rolls-Royce. I mean, that's very positive. Obviously, we need to see it written down and be really clear the rules that we'll operate by, but it was definitely a positive move.
So if you look there, that is carbon composite. That is titanium on these fan blades. It's the next generation of fan blades that Rolls-Royce is making. It's part of what they call the Ultra Fan. It could change the game, they say. But to give you a sense of just the timescales we're talking about, it was about a decade ago that work started, a bit over a decade ago, that work started on this. It's going to be another decade until they're in the skies. Just underlining, it's not just the next few years they're thinking about here. It's not just tariffs. It's not just Donald Trump. It's generations ahead for this next product.
Back at Bridgnorth aluminium plants, it's a similar story. They should benefit from the trade deal, only they don't know when it starts and how much of their exports it covers. So it's all still a bit theoretical. What's not theoretical is the impact on demand, which brings us back to the GDP figures.
What we're seeing is an impact on Q2. So if somebody stops placing orders in February or March, we see that hitting us in May and June. So it's
that's where you are now.
That's where we are now. So we know Q2 will be lower numbers than Q1, and we're hopeful that we can recover it for Q3, but we need that detail quickly to be able to do that.
So if their experience is anything to go by, strong growth in Q1 might be followed by much weaker growth in Q2. The economic rollercoaster of 2025 has only just begun. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Let's talk again to John and Ranil Showry. Ranil, do you give the government credit? You guys are obviously trying to pursue growth. Do you give them any credit here?
Look, any growth must be welcomed, but it's not how it feels to people out there right now, I can tell you that. Speaking to people down the pub, in cafes in my old constituency, people are saying it's really tough, and businesses themselves are saying it's really tough. NI being hiked on those particularly hospitality and retail businesses, many shops closing, job figures disappointing, unemployment up. It's not how it feels to people right now. So, look, I welcome the figure in the round, great, but they've got to do a lot more to make sure people feel some benefit.
John.
Good news. I think it will ramp up as well as the infrastructure investment gets going. My only cautionary note to the Chancellor is don't take demand out of the economy, particularly with regard to any cuts in expenditure, particularly around disability cuts, for example. So hold back and have a proper discussion about those rather than rush ahead with them. Otherwise, the growth that we're getting now will be undermined by reduced demand.
I guess, growth is the key to so much, isn't it? It's almost like having a cheat code when you're playing a computer game. Everything starts to get a bit easier when you're looking at the kind of balance sheets. I guess, they would say that this growth is a reflection of the decisions that they've made as a government. But then, of course, you've got the global headwinds of Donald Trump that they don't have any control about that could throw it all off course.
Yeah, so there are so many things that are not in the government's control, including interest rates. And so they've been lucky in respect of interest rates coming down as a result of global inflation coming down. And so long as that remains the case, then they will also benefit from that in the long run. But if Donald Trump's tariffs continue to impact global trade, inflation rises globally, we could see that petering out, and that would be really damaging for the UK economy.
That's why the need for a real deal with Europe now. That's going to be the next key negotiation. And if we can get that, that'll help stabilise the situation.
Watch this space.
Exactly.
Thanks very much. I see you smiling there. Now, we've been doing an awful lot this week on prisons, and today the Victims Commissioner says she's struggling to understand government changes to prisoner recall release policy and has also expressed concern for the safety of victims and the wider public. Well, Sky's Molly Malone she's our resident prisons expert here on the Politics Hub. She can tell us much more on this now. Molly, what's happening?
Well, I feel like, in a way, there's been a symmetry to what's happened on the show this week, and which kind of helps me explain it, really, because on Monday at Preston Prison, you were hearing the perspective of staff and from prisoners saying that they keep seeing this merry-go-round of people coming in and out. That is what recall is, because it's a big problem for the government at the moment. We've got 15% of the total prison population in England and Wales being those people on recall. So that's when people either go back to prison once they've been released for one, a further offence, or two, a breach of what's called their licence conditions. But sometimes that can be things like missing a probation appointment, not turning up to a probation appointment, or perhaps not reporting a change of stable accommodation to your probation officer. So it's up to that probation officer to judge risk. Sometimes they go back, in their view, for trivial reasons, but it's up to that probation officer. But from the government's point of view, it's clogging up a kind of overcrowded system. So yesterday we had that sudden announcement where they said they're going to change recall policy, and it affects those that were originally serving sentences of between 1 and 4 years. Now, what that means is they can go, in that sentence bracket, if they get recalled, back to prison for a 28-day period. Previously, it was only those people that were serving 12-month sentences that were eligible for that. But what that bracket has done, widening up that short-term recall, is basically meaning that more serious offenders can only serve 28 days and they don't have to prove to the parole board that they're safe to leave prison.
And domestic abuse is such a key one as well, isn't it? Because, you know, they know where the victims live, and obviously it's very difficult, of course, if you are one of those victims.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the fear of victims groups tonight. We've had the Domestic Abuse Commissioner writing to government saying it's going to cost lives. We've had the largest domestic abuse charity, Refuge, calling for domestic abuse perpetrators to be exempt. Similar calls, it's worth saying, were made with the early release policy that we've seen in the last year or so. And we've also heard from the Victims Commissioner, Baroness Newlove. She's written to the government and shared her letter with Sky News. And she says, I realise there are no easy options. That said, given my concerns about victim safety, I am genuinely struggling to understand why this specific group of offenders has been targeted for early release. She said, we're re-releasing a group of offenders assessed as high risk and with a track record of poor compliance. These high maintenance offenders are all being re-released at a time when the probation service is already struggling to cope with the huge demands being placed on it. For these reasons, I am very concerned about the implications for both victim and wider public safety. Now, it's worth saying this is her kind of real first intervention on early release policy in response to that policy. So it does matter. There are serious concerns amongst victim groups, and I don't think it's kind of going to go unnoticed, really. It's going to only continue putting pressure on the government. They'd say that they have an overcrowded system and they're dealing with it as an emergency piece of legislation, but clearly victims groups are really upset.
How much trouble do you think the government is in?
Well, I think they would say they've come into this inheriting a system that was absolutely ballooning. They've kind of got political cover, if you like, coming up with the sentencing review. So you've got David Gauke delivering this independent sentencing review, but look, that was commissioned by the government. They have a view. They need to sort of not clog up the system in the way that they think it is being at the moment. But, I mean, it's a difficult one.
Yeah, and I think James Timpson had a bit of a tough time as well, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, actually. I was going to reference, so you had a little shout-out at the POA, Prison Officers Association conference today. You can hear from James Timpson. There's a clip here.
I watched on Sophie Ridge, and you turn into a politician. I much prefer you as Lord Timpson, no politician, businessman, but we're slowly getting there, you know.
I'm just saying sorry to the other people on the table, but I think that's an insult that you're turning into a politician. No offence to anyone else sitting around this table, obviously.
I'm an honorary life member of the POA.
There you go. Not sure they know how to deal with you then. Molly, thank you very much indeed. Molly Malone talking us through that there. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. The former Reform MP Rupert Lowe tells us he's considering setting up his own political party and claims it would beat Nigel Farage. Welcome back. Well, the former Reform MP Rupert Lowe, the guy you can see right now on your screen, has told Sky News' Ali Fortescue that he is considering setting up his own political party and that he could beat Nigel Farage. He's been talking to Ali, as I mentioned, our political correspondent. Ali, what's been going on?
Well, look, I think it's important to remember, and you see these two side by side. I mean, that is what we remember on election night, them, well, the day after, you know, parading around Westminster. He was obviously one of the 5 Reform MPs that won in the general election. He was part of that big success story. Obviously, then we had his acrimonious sacking, and he was not shy in calling Nigel Farage a coward. He allegedly, there were verbal threats towards Zia Youssef. The CPS dropped that this week. There are separate allegations that I'll ask him about in my interview. But yeah, as you say, it is interesting to see where he goes now. We've heard his insults towards Nigel Farage, but I was interested to ask him a bit about how he thinks he's actually going to have an impact. Have a listen.
It's been dropped as it should have been. I think probably my legal team played a part in that. We were getting a little frustrated at the length of time it was taking, and almost the process is the punishment. So it's not right that innocent people should be put through the mill when, you know, it could have been done a lot quicker, a lot better, a lot more efficiently, and I think we'd have ended up with the same result, but quickly.
I think it's
good justice is quick justice.
It's important to say that you were cleared on those claims about Zia Youssef, but this is not those separate claims or complaints by 2 female employees about bullying in your
There is
constituency
no
office.
parliamentary investigation that I'm aware of going on at the moment. So
Well, one of those women made a formal complaint to the Parliamentary Independent Complaints and Grievance
she may well have done, but that has not come through to us yet. So I don't know about that. I shouldn't know about that, and she shouldn't have talked about that. So.
But I guess, you know, you
under
haven't
parliamentary
been
privilege,
cleared
I
of
can
everything.
assure you that
Clean bill of
nothing
health.
incorrect happened. It was all done with parliamentary HR, and it was all done entirely properly.
Is it very hard to challenge Nigel Farage from within the party?
Nigel Farage is running a cult. So Nigel Farage, it's the cult of Nigel, and it's either Nigel's way or the highway.
So you can't see a
and
world
all
where
you have
he
to do
would
is watch what the hands are doing, not what the mouth
give way
is
to
saying.
someone else.
Look at what happened to Ben Habib. Look what happened to Stephen Wolfe. Look what happened to Robert Kilroy-Silk. Look what happened to anybody with any form of ability around Nigel. He gets rid of them.
I did ask Nigel Farage if there was anything he wanted me to put to you, and he said no, irrelevant. I think by that he means that you're now irrelevant. You know, has he got a point there?
Look, Nigel's welcome to his opinion, and you know, I'm sitting here giving you this interview because they tried to put me in prison. I did actually decide a week ago I wasn't going to let this knock me off course, because I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm not going to allow a clumsy political assassination attempt to change my view of what needs to be done.
Nigel Farage also wrote in his response to me, Tommy R fan. I assume by that he's talking about Stephen Yaxley Lennon, the far-right campaigner, Tommy Robinson, suggesting that you're a fan of his. What's your response to that?
I'm not a fan of Tommy Robinson's. With Tommy, I say, render unto Tommy what is Tommy's, and render unto the British establishment what is the British establishment's. I don't make any other judgments than that. And, you know, Nigel might try to call me, which he does, far right. I'm not. I'm just made of common sense. I don't think Nigel's in it necessarily as an altruistic politician. I think he's a self-interested cultist.
You talk a lot about an alternative. Are you talking about an alternative party?
Will I set up my own party? I don't know yet. I may. So I haven't made my mind up. There are a number of options that I can now follow, but as a result of the political assassination attempt, I no longer am part of Reform, but I'm equally not going to leave the field. I'm going to finish off what I started and do my very best to give the British people a chance to vote for something that's going to give them their country back. That's my plan.
And do you think a potential party could take on Reform at the next election?
Of course. Because I think Reform is skin deep. I think it's a cult. I think Nigel's surrounded by very average people. I think he's not doing what I think is necessary to put in the building blocks.
And Elon Musk, have you spoken to him?
I've never spoken to him, but I've communicated with him on X.
But you would obviously
I haven't
take
asked
money
him.
from him.
I haven't asked him to fund me. At the end of the day, his support would be enough. I mean, the support of somebody like Elon Musk, who's doing fantastic things for America.
Would you join the Tories?
Tories, look, the Tories reformed are a powerful force, and arguably They have to basically get rid of most of head office, which I think is dysfunctional. They have to then probably peel off up to 70 of their, what I call Lib Dem MPs, who should be with the Lib Dems, not the Tories. They're not Tories. And they were the result of Cameron's policy of selecting MPs on quotas rather than merit.
So it doesn't sound like you're going to be joining any
So,
party. I mean, is there a world where you join
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the Tory party, reformed, is a very powerful body. I get on very well with the Tories. I have no argument with the Tories, other than with the fact that with an 80-seat majority, Boris squandered the opportunity he had to change the way Britain was governed.
Is there a world where you're a Tory MP at the next election?
I don't know. We'll just have to see.
Ali's interview there with Rupert Lowe. I do just want to bring you up to date with some breaking news that's come into us in the last few minutes, because we have had an update from the Met Police, and this is on a series of fires connected to properties related to Keir Starmer. So they've said that a man has been arrested in connection with a series of arson attacks in North London, and he has now been charged. Roman Lavrinovich, who's 21 years old, from Synonym. He's a Ukrainian national. He's been charged with 3 counts of arson with intent to endanger life. And they relate to 3 incidents: a vehicle fire on the 8th of May, a fire at the entrance of a property on the 11th of May, and a fire at a residential address in the early hours of the 12th of May. The statement goes on to say, due to the property having previous connections with a high-profile public figure, officers from the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command have led the investigations into the fire. The man who's been charged, Lavrinovich, was arrested in the early hours of 13th of May. He's remained in custody after warrants of further detention were obtained. So that breaking news there, a man charged with 3 counts of arson with intent. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here. I should say there is not that much detail we can give at this time because of the charge. But what can we say, John?
The arson is alleged to have happened in the early hours, about 1:30 in the morning. I think it was early Tuesday morning. And it was the front door of the Starmer house was damaged, badly damaged. Now, the family have not lived there since the general election. They're in Downing Street. But the family rented it out to, we understand, Sir Keir Starmer's sister-in-law who's living there. A car that the Starmers previously owned was also attacked, and also another property not far away, up its Kentish Town part of North London, where a flat that Mr Starmer used to live in, that he still owns, that was damaged as well. Now, John will recall that at the beginning of Prime Minister's questions yesterday, there was sympathy from Kemi Badenoch, Sir Ed Davey, and this incident has quite shocked MPs, I think it's fair to say, because, of course, there have been these dreadful attacks on members of Parliament. Besides the 2 MPs that have been killed, Joe Cox and Sir David Davis, do you remember the MP for Finchley and Golders Green, Mike Freer, a Conservative MP? There was an arson attack on his constituency office. And a lot of MPs are very concerned about their security. Now, obviously, the Starmers were not living in that house, but it just goes to show that MPs do face horrible threats and horrible attacks, arson, or all sorts of things. And there's a real concern. Now, John will have a view on this.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig, they're bringing us up to date with the latest there. From the Met Police, that a man has been charged in connection with 3 attacks with 3 counts of arson with intent to endanger life. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Ask us anything. Full details of how you can put your questions to Sky News correspondents, presenters and analysts. Plus, I have to apologise for my big face there on your TV screens. We will be getting some of my answers, though. I'm going to have a word with the production staff after this.
Coming up on the UK tonight at 8 o'clock as MPs prepare to debate the assisted dying bill again. I'll be joined by a woman who's under police investigation after taking her husband to Dignitas in Switzerland to die. Also ahead, the Prime Minister's plan to send failed asylum seekers abroad and why this government says it is different to the last one's Rwanda plan. And the cut-price copy of the Magna Carta that turned out to be an original worth millions and millions. All that and more
on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
The Premier League run-in is live on USA and streaming on Peacock. Only 2 matches remain.
The climax of the Premier League season.
Friday, exclusively on Peacock. Top 5 hopeful Chelsea host Man United. Sunday on USA. Newcastle continue to fight for Champions League qualification when they visit Arsenal. This is the Premier League run-in. Live on USA and Peacock.
And I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Now, I want to take a moment to tell you about a new Sky News feature. It's called Ask Us Anything. Sounds dangerous, but it is an opportunity for you to put your questions to our correspondents, presenters and analysts like John Craig about their specialisms or maybe stories that they're covering as well. And the questions are already pouring in on the website. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of it. I've answered a couple myself. So just to look at the first one. These are real questions I've had come through, by the way. The first one is from Graham Richards, 43, who asked, what was really going through your mind when the ex-MP Simon Clarke clearly had no idea about what a trans man is? Now, in case you didn't see that moment on the show, this is the clip to remind you.
Great.
If trans men then have to use women's toilets, that's going to make women less safe, because how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man? And so I think we have to look at
I don't follow that logic.
Why?
Because the point is that we're saying that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using women's toilets. That's the point of this ruling, among other things.
But a trans man is biologically a woman.
Someone who's transitioned from being a woman to a man is...
And so they would then have to use women's toilets.
I think this...
And that's the problem. That is the problem, and that's what concerns me.
I'll be honest, this is something that we can talk about an awful lot more and debate an awful lot more. So my answer to Graham would actually be that I guess I would speak up in defence of silence, you know? Like, because silence sometimes shows that you were listening to another person, that you're thinking. Politicians are quite good at talking and not listening and just getting their perspective across, so that's, I guess, would be my answer to that one. John's got a thought, though.
He's not the only MP or ex-MP. I heard a funny story the other day about a current Labour MP getting on in years, shall we say, not John McDonnell, I hope, who
it ages and flows out now, doesn't it, Dave?
who said to when this trans row was big a few weeks ago, who said to his very young researcher, "Now you've got to tell me, you've got to explain to me what is all this about these transvestites?" and he had to be told by the young researcher, "No, not transvestites." So there is confusion amongst some of our parliamentarians.
Yeah, it's fair. We've got another question to play now. This one is from Osama Ayub. His question is, what checks and balances are in place to confirm that an interviewer's conscious or unconscious biases don't come into play when interviewing someone? And I think that's a great question, actually. My honest answer to that is the longer I've been in politics, the less political views I have, because you just kind of end up sort of analysing it so much that it kind of goes away. But I think the important thing, actually, is to be aware of your own bias in terms of, you know, where you live, who your parents are, your education, your experiences, you know, your housing, and to try and get out and talk to as many people as possible in order to counter that.
It's often, you want to try and walk in the other person's shoes a bit mentally, don't you, and think about that?
I think that's it. It's the empathy thing.
But it's also to challenge when questions aren't answered, regardless who's in front of you, isn't it? Because that's
that's true.
what we should all face.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. John, I feel like I want to ask you one.
On that one, about Tom Watson always says about me, the former deputy leader, he says, think about you, he says, you disrespect all politicians equally.
Well, there we go.
That's my point.
But we do, don't we? Come on, we give Labour politicians a hard time, we give Tory politicians a hard time. I mean, on Twitter, or X as it's now called, I mean, I've been called a Tory, I've been called a lefty. You know, we get called all sorts of things, don't we? And I reckon if you're getting attacked by both sides, you're probably doing OK.
We know you're a Trotskyite.
John, if I was going to write into the Sky website, I think because you were someone, and I remember actually just before I joined Sky News, which was a long time ago, and I remember looking up at John Craig, or Sir John Craig, as we call him in the office, as like, you know, the kind of big TV celebrity who everyone knew in Westminster, like the kind of reporter that I'd always kind of aspired to be. So my question to you is, in your years covering Westminster, what is a kind of standout moment? What sticks in your sort of mind?
Well, being kissed by Joanna Lumley live on Sky News, that was the day of remember the Gurkhas' victory, 2009. I remember it was when Cameron was opposition leader and Gordon Brown's government got defeated. I remember Phil Woolers was the immigration minister. And so I just finished interviewing Joanna Lumley, this great champion of the Gurkhas, and I turned back to the presenter, it was Jeremy Thompson at the time, and she planted this great big kiss on my cheek, and Jeremy Thompson, who was presenting, burst out laughing. And that was a highlight for me.
I can imagine that. We did ask for a couple of other questions in for the programme as well. I've got one from Sir Renell in Hampshire. Have you ever made an on-air gaffe that still makes you cringe or laugh when you think it back? So many. Normally about swearing accidentally when I didn't mean to. One MP, I described him as a brick in the wall and didn't say brick correctly. That was that was honestly, that was genuinely...
That's probably accurate.
Yeah, that was a terrible gaffe. It was a terrible gaffe. We've got another question from a Jay McDonnell in Hayes and Harlington, and he wants to know, how do you keep your patience with politicians who won't answer your questions? Anyone in mind, John? Or I remember when you were Shadow Chancellor.
That was the thing, really. After, do you know, you have that thing when they go through all this media training, and it's dreadful. And the media training just keep talking so they don't get another question and that sort of thing. And when I took over as Chancellor, I said, well, I can't go through that. And just answer the question. And if you don't know, just say, I don't know. As simple as that.
It comes across so much
It just means authenticity is important, isn't it, really?
But there are some politicians who, whatever the question you ask, they give you the same answer over and over again. I mean, Gordon Brown was an offender, and Michael Howard, I remember, the former Conservative. You'd ask a question in so many different ways, you'd get the same answer. Presumably, because the spin doctor had said, this is the point we want to get across.
When Paxman did it with him, can we ask him?
Yeah, that was
destroyed him.
Yeah, it did.
They ran out of other questions to ask. So that's the other side of it, right?
I think my personal one is when politicians say, just want to be clear, and then you know that what they're going to say is the least clear thing you're ever going to believe.
The other one I like is when a politician says, and I'm not making a political point, you know very well they're about to launch an attack on their opponents.
It's totally right. It's totally
I'm afraid
right.
I do that. I try to be as objective as possible. Never works.
Yeah. I was a bit nervous when I was told that you're going to ask questions to us, but I think we've escaped all right. But they definitely send in your questions as well if you do want to ask me or John or any other member of the Sky team as well. Thanks both very much indeed for being good sports on the panel as ever. John, thanks for being here as well. That is it from us tonight. But I'll see you Monday at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbet. But have a great Friday, great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.